Pessoal, bom dia. Hoje eu estou aqui com um convidado, Matthias Toplak, que vai nos falar um pouco sobre as questões relacionadas a ritos funerários na era Viking, algumas das pesquisas deles que estão relacionadas também aos achados arqueológicos em algumas, como é que eu posso dizer, alguns túmulos na era Viking. Então, a gente vai falar um pouco disso e também vamos falar um pouco também de como as atividades no Museu Viking de Haithabu, da qual ele é chefe lá no Museu Viking de Haithabu, e a gente vai ter aqui essa conversa justamente sobre alguns desses elementos. Mr. Matthias, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. It's a big pleasure receiving you here in the Viking World channel. So for start our interview, I would like to know how you start your interest for Viking Age, for doing these researches about this period. And since that you became the, how can I say, chief in the Viking Museum of Haithabu.
That's a good question. And I have to go back a little bit because it already started during my early years in school. And the Viking Age was always some part of my own history because I have family relations to the north, and it always felt kind of familiar to me. And so I decided to do something with history. It was not the largest pleasure for my parents, but yeah, I already wrote such a small thesis about the Viking Age in school in the 9th or 10th grade, I think. Yeah, and so I simply decided without thinking about anything else to study archaeology and study the Viking Age, and yeah, there was no alternative for me. And luckily it ended up in Haithabu, which is, at least from a German perspective, the most important point, the most important location for the Viking Age.
Oh, that's fantastic. And one of the most interesting things in your research that we are discussing here is about funerals, traditions, and some about graves in the Viking Age. And one of the most interesting things and the questions of, I think, many people have to say, how the Vikings have his tradition with the death, how they how can they confront death in many aspects.
To my opinion, I do not think that the people we call Vikings, because it's a difficult term. I don't think that many of them had a different approach towards death and the dead as we did in the entire world, so to say, at least before the modern times, because death is always there. It's normal. It's part of our lives. But what's interesting about this is how they used the death and funeral ceremonies for political and social purposes with all these fantastic funeral events. For example, Oderberg or Gokstad, or this what was written down in Ibn Fadlan's description of the Risala. And there we encounter a use of death and grief and funeral ceremonies and belief of the afterlife that was heavily incorporated into everyday politics and power ambitions and manipulating power and all these aspects. And this is something I personally find highly interesting because there are several aspects. There is personal grief and all this emotional stuff because someone died and you have to say farewell to him. But at the same time, also all these possibilities to negotiate your social status and to negotiate your family status just by, for example, killing a slave girl or anything like this. And this makes it, in my opinion, highly fascinating.
Well, that's amazing. So we have this idea of death connected to all structures in that societies in the Viking Age, and they use this for show, I think, a powerful side in politics and terms or religious terms, and this is a very nice view of that. And one of the most interesting things, and if death is connected, I think, obviously in the Viking Age, to the religious elements. And how much these religious elements influence this contact with death? The perspective of having a idea of Valhalla or something is it's real for that period, or they only think in other possibilities for death? What is real or what is not so much comprehension in this part of the history?
That's a very difficult question, because I think we tend to interpret everything with death from a religious perspective, which might, at least in our, let's say, Northern European viewpoint, we are coming from a Christian society and so on. In my opinion, religion is not that dominant when it comes to death and funeral rites. Of course, you have this idea of the afterlife, maybe Valhalla or some other ideas where the dead might go. And of course, the funeral ceremony is a rite of passage. So you're preparing the soul of the deceased on his voyage to the afterlife. But when it comes in terms of grave goods, for example, horses that are slaughtered during the funeral ceremony and that are placed in the grave, or all these accessories like swords and shields and so on, I don't believe that they really believe the dead will need them in the afterlife. I'm not quite sure if they really believe that they would fight with these perhaps even bended swords in Valhalla during all day. But to me, it's more about showing the position of the deceased, showing which status, which position he had in society, and perhaps even manipulating or negotiating this position in society. For example, if we look at some burials of infants, young boys, there is my favorite example from Gotland, Ire. It's a boy from about 10 to 12 years of age, and he's equipped with a sword. He's not even able to swing the sword. It's too heavy and too large for him. But anyway, this sword in his grave should show that he's a member of this aristocratic warrior elite society. And at least in my opinion, this is much more important than some religious ideas about the afterlife. But this is just my opinion, and we can discuss and interpret this in other ways.
Oh, that's interesting point of view. And one of the most I think thing that we met in some days in the past, I think probably in 2000, yes, 2023, 2002, the Northman movie show some burials in some moments. We have the Tovir burial that was interpreted like a little side in the manuscript of the Ahmed ibn Fadlan. They use this for inspiration to do this scene with the burial of the ship. And we have the idea of the burials that the uncle of Amleth doing for his wife and his little brother that was using a horse, and they are put in a volcanic region, and they doing a simple just a simple burial. What you can say about the reality of this? It's an idea that we have this concept of doing burials with ships burning, or no, it's idea that we are the interpretation of the writer of the manuscript. What you can say about some of aspects of the burials in the Viking Age and they use in the film, right?
So it's some time ago that I saw this movie, which is brilliant in my opinion, by the way, one of the best Viking movies, but I can't really remember the scenes. So time to watch it again. But anyway, I think that most burials in the Viking Age are not that spectacular as we always think. We always have these burning ships in mind, which is true in a way, because we can prove that some members of the royal elite, perhaps, or some very high-standing people were buried in their ships, and sometimes these ships were also burned. But most burials are, let's say, boring in a way. And when I look, for example, to Haithabu, we have some very intriguing, very fascinating burials, such as the boat chamber burial, which is a combination of a chamber burial but with a boat on top, which is unique in the Viking Age, and with slaughtered horses and equipment for the dead and three people in the grave and so on. So highly fascinating burial, which matches our beliefs, our perceptions of a proper Viking burial in many ways. And again, most of the burials we can excavate in Haithabu, and we've excavated, I think, 1,300 kind of approximately 10,000 to 12,000 burials that existed in Haithabu during the Viking Age. Most of these burials are simple inhumations. So the deceased were just buried in their best clothes, or perhaps in a shroud, in a coffin, without any grave goods, perhaps some elements of their everyday dress, such as a belt or a fibula, perhaps a knife. So not very different to the burials we are used today.
Oh, that's interesting. Because we saw a difference from, I think, to the Iron Age, to the Vandal Age, to the Viking Age, to the periods, to see and saw how the idea and concepts are changing from that time. We have ideas like certainhood, that was idea of to the burial that was with a bigger leadership but not burning, but is inside in the earth, and pass to a ship that will burn with the fire. And this is very interesting how these have these chimes and changes from this that's different periods. And you can say.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's a changing of the burial rites in many ways. But again, you have some elements that always appear in a way. So if you compare, for example, Sutton with Gokstad, there's not that much difference. You place the dead with all his belongings on a ship, and then you put a mount above him. And on the other side, you have some changes. For example, inhumation replacing cremation graves more and more during the later Viking Age. So it's interesting. What does this change, or it's my question always, what does this change in the burial customs make with the mentality of the people? Okay, you're placing your dead not longer in a you're not cremating him, but you're placing your dead in the ground, not in large mounds, but perhaps in an ordinary flat pit or something. So there was this change in the mentality and the religious perception of the people, which we just can trace as archaeologists through the graves.
Oh, that's interesting. And one of the, I think one side of this related to the death, I think, is the ideas of the sacrifices and animal sacrifice, people sacrifice. How much the idea was correct or wrong about this topic? Because I think productions and movies and series love to use the idea of sacrifice to shock and impersonate the public with with in many aspects. And we what we know about the using of that in the Viking Age.
Yeah, we have evidence both for animal sacrifices and for human sacrifices during funeral ceremonies, at least, but both not that common. So it's when I just running down my list of Viking Age burials, which I got in mind, there are surprisingly few with animals. Mainly these high status graves, such as Osberg, Gokstad, where you have several animals, horses, dogs, and whatever in the graves. And there are some graves with 2 or maybe even more individuals inside, where we can always speculate: do we have one? What's the word? Is there just one dead that was buried in the grave, and the other ones are sacrificed to follow him, perhaps into the afterlife, or is it actually so that many people died in the same moment, or perhaps they died in the winter times, and due to the frost and the ice and snow, it was not possible to dig up a grave, so that you were kind of storing the dead, as Ibn Fadlan, for example, says about this funeral ceremony of the Rus. And then in spring times, you're burying all the dead together that belong to a family and died, for example, during the winter. But I think that we have some evidence for human sacrifices in the Viking Age, and it's for me highly interesting. What's behind this idea? Is it just to send some slave with you to the afterlife so that your father or mother or whatever have a servant and a slave in the afterlife? Or is it something more? Is it perhaps all about the blood and the gore, for example, just to make sure that something bloody happens? You still there?
Yeah, I'm still
Okay.
there. It's I was listening and trying to process. And this is interesting because we saw many aspects in the sacrifice, because we have the most famous scene that Ahmed ibn Fadlan described, that the woman that was saying, I saw my father, my mother, and my family. She was putting up for 2 months, and she proclaimed this. And I think we have sacrifice with two most common animals. I think horses and dogs are very used in some aspects of the graves. And this is interesting to analyze, because have all this idea to the death. I think the animals are a conductor to Valhalla. We can say about that. I read in this in some articles that the animals are using for conduct his owners to the death.
Yeah, that's this idea of a so-called psychopomp. So especially horses that should transport you to the afterlife. I put forward see this for cats in Viking Age graves, because as you saw, I'm absolutely cat people. And there might have also been this belief of cats being able to cross the borders between this world and the other world, because they were, silent hunters and elegant and so on. Yeah, this is in every case an important point. But it might also be the case if you look at horse burials, for example, on Viking Age Iceland. They were killed in a very gruesome manner. So it's all about bloodshedding. Their throat was cut, they were decapitated, just to make sure that blood is flowing. That's a very brutal situation during the funeral. So there might be several aspects, and they're interwoven. First, the idea that you're simply destroying wealth when you're killing a horse because you can use it otherwise. Maybe even the idea of a horse being a psychopomp, transporting the deceased into the afterlife so that you can ride into Valhalla as a proper Viking. But perhaps also this idea that there's something happening, something violent. Its blood is flowing. So you have this idea, it was once called ritual scapegoating. So you can focus all your aggressions and violence within the society on the horse, which is killed, and then everything is good. So I think there are always several aspects and several causalities that are just flowing inside and intermingling.
Oh, that's fantastic. The idea is about the how they are part of this interpretation of the death and the conduction of their owners to decide the other side, you can say that. And one of the aspects very interesting is the objects. Objects, I think, define how the status, how the persons are, or who they made their activities in that period. And what you can say about the use of the objects, how the interpretations we can say when you put a sword, or we can put a brooch, or some spear. What this indicates to when using some of these objects?
Again, that's difficult because people are not standing there with their full gear and then they're dying and they're collapsing into the grave pit, or they are not burying themselves, as Mike Parker Pearson once said. So there's always someone who's deciding which objects are going to be in the grave. So it's something that is composed. There is a tableau that is constructed by the objects that are placed in the grave with the deceased. So it's the first question: are these objects really belonging to the dead? Is it the sword? Is it the sword of the people, of the man that is buried there, or is it the sword from someone else? And what I find really interesting when looking on Gotlandic graves, which I did quite a lot, there are some graves with female jewelry, and you have this animal-shaped brooches, which are mostly wearing in pairs. And sometimes it's so that one brooch is significantly older than the other one. And I do not think that this woman really was wearing both at the same time during their lifetimes. But this might be just the fact that both families of the dead are placing one brooch into the grave just to show that she's belonging to all of them. So you might really construct identities, a scenery of identity through all these objects that are coming into the grave. So it's a very difficult question to speak about all these objects in the grave. Why are they there? What do the people want to tell with all these objects in the grave? It's yeah, we can interpret a lot without having real hypothesis.
Oh, that's interesting, because when a woman was found with some armory, we can say that she was in a battle, or probably not. It's much common to say, oh, she's an important woman and was put in this because this represent a biggest thing in the society. Example, the battle, the war, it's a part. I know that it's difficult to answer the question, but what the idea behind of women and weapons in the grave?
There are very few. There's just famous Birka warrior woman 581 BJ the grave, and that's the only one where we've got a female individual with all kinds of weapons, but also with male dress accessories. So she was perhaps not dressed as a woman, but dressed as a man, being buried as a high-ranking warrior. That's highly interesting, but it does not show that this female was also standing in the first line in the battle and was really fighting, but it's just showing that she was buried as a male warrior. And perhaps she was also living as a male person, was wearing male clothes and was perhaps even armed during her lifetime, but we cannot say from this grave that she was actually fighting. It's exactly the same as with all these children's graves of infants. Some young boys with these large swords. They were simply not able to fight with them, but it's a symbol. It's showing their position in society, and this might be the same with this very interesting Birka grave. So it's a highly fascinating find, but in my opinion, we do not really know what to do with it.
Oh, that's it's amazing to know that, because um, it's a idea that was very interesting when we have some scene in the Northman movie when they are in the Rus territory, that a woman appear exactly like the Birka. I think they doing this with purpose to say, oh, this the idea how this woman probably are and how she was acting in this context. And this is very interesting when we saw that she was choosing her slaves in that scene. And this is interesting because we saw that uh, she's in a position as a leader in that scene, and this is a lot interesting. She's very, how can I say, in this scene, I think it probably some people don't see how so much her, but she's in there in that scene, and this is interesting because she's appeared very very shortly, for a shortly time. I think seconds in the scene. And this is interesting, as you say, about this idea of using weapons for woman, or she not using, it's just a symbolic element. And we can say that the Vikings in some point have afraid of her that how can I say doing this that the deaf people they I think have some burials that people are with stones, biggest stones in her bodies, and we can say that they are afraid with the draugr or some elements that because the people sometimes receive some punishment for acting some action, and they using this for the body not return and have some of these ideas. I read this in some articles about this some of these ideas of how Vikings saw that the Norse people in that period.
Yeah, we have this idea, as you said, the Draugr from Icelandic literature, which are the animated corpses. So it's a physical reappearance. The dead corpses are rising from the grave and doing harm to the people. And this is something which is always coming up with this idea that the Germanic people in general were afraid of the dead. And in the Viking Age, this might be actually the fact, because we have some graves where we have small amulets with runic inscriptions, with magic spells that should prevent the dead from rise again from the graves. So this is a very good proof for this. And as you said, we have several graves that are termed deviant burials, perhaps with stones on the corpse, people lying prone, so on their belly with the face into the ground. And it's always this idea that these people should be that the people burying these people wanted to prevent the dead from rising again. This might be the case in some of these graves, but for example, these prone burials, so people being buried on their belly, at least in the later Viking Age, is, at least in my opinion, a Christian symbol, showing humility, showing dignity, piety before God. So it's something that is positively connected, and in this way detached from ideas of the corpse returning to the world of the living. But as you said, we have this idea of the Draugr, and this might have affected the people in the Viking Age, actually.
Oh, that's interesting. So we can say that the Vikings, the Norse people in the Viking Age are very closer to some idea of the deaths probably will probably return, or and this is some are very interesting because now we have the ideas of zombies, but the Vikings have some afraid of these ideas of the death and the return of them, and this is a very different perspective about that, because I think in many societies we have this idea. Victorian age have the idea of afraid of the vampires, and we have some ideas in I think in probably in some periods of the Germany about the werewolves, and the Vikings bring the idea of some ideas of the is of the this idea of the living dead, and this is fantastic to know how the ideas are composing the periods from these types of queer folkloric creatures. This is fantastic. And I would like to pass now for know more about how the activities in the Viking Museum of Haithabu. That was fantastic work that was produced in there. Can you explain us how works the activities in the museum?
Yeah, we have in Haithabu two, let's say, institutions. On the one hand, we have a classical museum with all these artifacts and showcases, and you have a media guide which you can also access via internet, so you can actually make a tour through Haithabu without being there. And on the other hand, we have in the center of the original settlement of Haithabu, which is 800 meters away from the museum, 7 reconstructed houses that were reconstructed some 15 years ago according to the archaeological features that were excavated in Haithabu. So it's a very fantastic opportunity, of course, for me as archaeologist and as head of the museum, but also for the audience, that you can enter the Viking Age in some way. You can experience everything about the Viking Age. You can touch, smell, can eat aspects of Viking Age everyday life. And we have a large number of volunteers, Viking Age reenactors, that are bringing the houses back to life again during the summer period. So from Easter to October. And I have, I think, 500 to 600 people that are coming over the year. So normally when you're coming as a visitor to Haithabu, at least at the weekend, you can encounter some up to 20, 30 Viking Age reenactors, showing you how living and craftsmanship was in the Viking Age. And that's, for me, it's brilliant. It's like a large playground for Viking Age enthusiasts.
That's fantastic. And I completely forgot to question, what is the context of the Vikings in Germany? It's a very interesting thing to see, because I never bring this subject to the channel, but I was very curious and to know about how work the ideas of the people in the north to come to Germany and have this region of Haithabu. What is this begin?
First of all, the region where I'm living here in northern Germany was part of Denmark until 1920. So it's just some 100 years. It's German. So actually, we do not have real Viking Age history in Germany, but the German people are totally mad about the Vikings. It's really fascinates them. Maybe even because it's not part of the German history in a way that Germany was part of this Viking homelands, but that there were many contacts between the Vikings and let's say middle or central and southern Europe. But when you're doing research or comparing this interest in different historical epochs in Germany, you will always find out that the Vikings are extremely popular. There's so much about the Vikings in media, in advertising. You can get all kinds of books and comics, and of course, Vikings, this TV series, is highly popular here.
Oh, that's interesting. And we know that Germany have this period of the Germanic period. This is have some influence in the parts that will be the Viking Age, or this is not connected. The subjects are not connected. What we can say about that, because they have the Germanic period, and then the Germanic tribes, they are part of that we can be in the future this period called the Viking Age.
That's a difficult question, because it's not related in the same sense that you can say that some kind of Germanic people survived in the north as later becoming the Viking Age. Because during the Viking Age here in Germany, you already have some, let's say, Christian High Middle Ages. Yes, this Carolingian epoch, and later on the Saxon Ettonian Empire. So everything starts with castles and knights and so on. But of course, we have the Germanic tribes, this Germanic era, the migration period here in Germany, and this is something which is not that popular to most of the audience here in Germany. It's something that is really unknown, and it's always also a little bit neglected due to all this misuse with everything that is kind of Germanic during the National Socialist times.
Oh, that's interesting. And what you can say about some? We have some finds of the graves of Viking Age period in this region of Viking. What find some aspects that you can say, oh, have some many aspects that the Vikings put in this region. What's exactly occurred in this region of Haithabu?
We have quite a lot of graves. As I said, we assume that we have 10,000 to 12,000 graves in Haithabu, or at least around Haithabu. And this is a very interesting area for the entire Viking Age, and especially for the emergence of that what we later call Denmark, because Haithabu is located in the border region between the Viking world, so to say, and the Frankish and later the Saxon-Ottonian, so the German Empire. And we have evidence for an elite presence here. So the first Danish kings that they are sitting here in Haithabu, or not sitting in Haithabu, but they're using this region for their power structure, and later on also Harald Bluetooth and Svein Forkbeard. And they are getting at least all their silver, their money they need for all their wars and for establishing a kingdom. They get it here in Haithabu. So we have a large number of smaller farmsteads and cemeteries that are belonging to a local elite here. So Haithabu is actually in the Viking Age a very important hotspot. Perhaps you might compare it to the Mälaren region in middle Sweden.
Oh, that's very interesting to solve these aspects. And I would like to know a little more about the reenacted activities in this Viking Center. We have the activities like the Avolfa. We have the activities that a person that's doing the part of some glass beads. How we can say that we this in the center of Viking Age have this part, or how it work?
You mean reenactment and Haithabu?
Yeah, the reenacts that having in the Viking Center.
Yeah, it's normally so that people can, members of the Viking Age reenactment scene can approach me and can just come to Haithabu, and they are either living in the reconstructed houses, so they have to cook on open fire and sleep inside the houses, or they can also put up tents. And actually, they are absolutely free to do whatever they want. So there are some that are just hanging around all day and speaking with the visitors, or cooking, and other can also start with some handcrafts activities, making glass beads, as you say, making leather work. We're starting with a small blacksmith, and we have, as Haithabu is an important port of trade. We have, of course, some boats, and we have a crew of our boat members that are preparing and repairing our boats and are also sailing or rowing, depends on the wind, with the boats, to give our visitors the impression of very lively Haithabu, where you can approach almost all aspects of Viking Age life.
Oh, that's very interesting. And have some days that have some market or event in the Haithabu Viking Center. Have some periods that have some specific events that people can go and see some type of market that they you show some products and people can buy.
Yeah, we have 3 large markets during the season, and 2 of them are in Haithabu itself during spring on Easter for 4 days, and in the middle of July, our last Dutch summer market. And the fascinating thing about them is they are happening in Haithabu on a meadow that was not excavated yet. So all this large area of Haithabu, only 5% have been excavated yet. So all these people are standing on the ground, on holy ground, so to say, on actually Haithabu. And the summer market is a very large market with 400 to 500 participants coming from entire Europe. So we have, of course, quite a lot of German reenactors. We have reenactors from Scandinavia, from Eastern Europe, from France, so Western Europe. So our visitors can buy, of course, different stuff, all these reenactment replicas, but they can also try several crafts. So we have workshops for the visitors. We have, of course, some fun battle for the kids. We're telling stories, doing guided tours. And the most interesting aspect for me always is the evening when we're doing lectures for us as reenactors ourselves. So yeah, these are our main events, and we have a autumn fair which will be at the end of this month, so 25th to 26th of October, and this is happening inside the museum. So we have selected some craftsmen from the reenactment scene across around Haithabu, and they are showing their objects, their products next to the showcases with the original objects. So the goldsmith is standing just beside the showcases with all these golden objects, and you can actually buy replicas next to the original one, which is a small but very nice event. So I'm really looking forward.
Oh, fantastic! And have some, how can I say, some demonstrations of battles in the center. We can, if people want to see more actions of the Viking Age, we can saw these reenactors doing some demonstration of battles.
Yeah, not that much. We are more focusing on Haithabu being a port of trade and a center of production. But of course, Haithabu is in the Viking Age. It's an important Viking Age trading place, and the Viking Age is defined in a way by all these military aspects, by raids and plundering and combat and so on. So we have at least a small battle during the summer market, which is mostly fun for kids. But of course, warriors are showing their weapons. This is simply a part of the Viking Age, which we cannot neglect.
Oh, that's fantastic! I didn't know the idea that this is a center very very interesting to meet, and this is, I think, one of the, I think it's one of the center that I want most to visit, because I love to learn about Viking Age. I was researching for 8 years in that area, and love to saw how these centers are working, and how they put to create something that you can be very immersive in this aspect of the Viking Age. Mr. Matthias, I would like to thank you so much for doing this interview here in the channel. It was a major pleasure receiving you here. I think we learned a lot about the graves and Viking burials, and about the Viking Center, that I was very, very curious to know about this center. So thank you so much for being here and available your time to explain to us about that.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and you're absolutely welcome.
I will just stop the recording.